Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club, where your March infestation has been this book, The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, the third book in her series of novels about Thomas Cromwell, who started from nothing, lowborn, famously lowborn, and was raised by King Henry VIII to the heights of both uh, spiritual and temporal power. He was keeper of the Privy Seal and also vicegerent for religious matters in England under Henry. He was by far the most powerful person in the kingdom, able to amass great wealth, able to amass great land holdings and dispense them at will, steadily raised by Henry to one state after another, and eventually to the peerage. Right before his downfall, he's raised to the peerage as Lord Essex. And in this final bit that we're doing for today, we are wrapping up The Mirror and the Light, and this is the end of the story. Henry has raised Cromwell. Cromwell has made almost nothing but enemies at home and abroad. And then on one level, on one surface interpretation, we can go with this because certainly plenty of historians and biographers have gone with this. Cromwell extends himself too far. He makes a marriage alliance of state for Henry VIII with Anne of Cleves, the heiress of a German prince. The speculation is that Cromwell has been doing this in order to placate and sidestep the Schmalkaldic League to get around the Reformation forces and yet pursue Reformation. But whatever his motivation was, there's also mention of alum and of important trade routes. But no matter what the explanation was, Cromwell here is proposing and pushes through and convinces Henry to do something that Henry has never done before, which is to suppress his own desires. Henry VIII does not do that. And if you make a state marriage, that's the ultimate expression of suppressing your own desires. You are going to be married to someone when you don't want to be. Cromwell, for some odd reason, thinks that Henry can do this and will do this, and it doesn't work. Henry is immediately disillusioned with the idea, and I think would have been anyway, no matter what Anne of Cleves ended up looking like or whatever kinds of second guessings he had. The typical interpretation of the fall of Cromwell is that he overreached, he put Henry in this position, and not only did Henry want out of the position, but he wanted rid of the minister who did it to him. And so Cromwell falls. And it's left to all of those enemies that he's made over all the last 10 years to drum up all sorts of reasons why. That is a typical interpretation of the arc, of the end of the arc of Cromwell's rise and fall. The real picture is, of course, more complicated, but in terms of what we're getting in this novel, it doesn't ultimately matter because the final chapter that we're reading today is the end. We have finally reached July of 1540, and Cromwell has been arrested. He's arrested at the end of the previous chapter. The end of the previous section of the book is him being arrested and put in the Tower of London under very strict circumstances. He is not allowed to wander in the gardens. He is not allowed to have his door unlocked. He is a prisoner in the Tower of London. He's not kept in straight circumstances. He's got comfort and an attendant because he was raised to the peerage. He is treated as a gentleman, not as a commoner. He's not down below. He's not in the cellars. But it's a brave narrative choice on Hilary Mantel's part to set this final chapter where and when she does. Because as Cromwell himself points out, he himself notices it in these chapters, when Henry turns his face from someone, when have you ever known him to turn it back? You can go into the tower and you can talk for the first few days or maybe even the first few weeks about how once I'm set back at liberty, once things are back to normal. Cromwell's attendants do that. His friends do that. His few remaining friends. And even he does that. When he's being interrogated by a commission, Lord Norfolk and Stephen Gardiner and Henry Reesley, who brought him down, who betrayed him. When he's being questioned by these people, he actually says at one point, well, I'll try not to take all these questions personally and hold them against you when I am at liberty again. But Cromwell himself knows. On some level, he knows Henry doesn't ever change his mind with things like this. He's done with you, and that's it. Cromwell points out that when he was done with his rightful wife, Catherine of Aragon, he left her to die. When he was done with Anne Boleyn, he handed her over to strangers and rode away into the countryside into the bright sunlight, and never came back and never thought about it again. Nevertheless, for the beginning parts of this final chapter, these final pages that we're reading, Cromwell is being interrogated. He is holding out to the possibility that maybe this will not be the end of him. He even famously writes a letter to Henry, crying out for mercy, mercy, mercy. And wonders in these chapters, it's a little, Hilary Mantel get a little bit of meta fun at our expense. She has Cromwell wonder, will this plea of all the things he's written survive? And of course it does. Cromwell writes a couple of letters to Henry reminding him, I did a lot of good for you. I'm sorry that I've offended you. He tells himself the thing to do here is to comply with anything that Henry wants until his quote unquote killing fit subsides. And in the course of these pages, we get his tormentors reading out all the kinds of things with which they are going to threaten him. He is finally learning. Now that he's been arrested, he's finally learning the case against him. And it has a whole bunch of moving parts. Not all of them seem very serious. And Mantell writes it in a way that that encourages you to think none of it is very serious. That the more knowledgeable counselors, William Fitzwilliam or the Duke of Suffolk, don't believe it. They don't believe the case. They just know there's no talking to Henry when he's like this. And we'll come back to that. But, in the meantime, we learn what those bits and pieces are. And they have two essential prongs. One is the standard trope of the overmighty subject, that Cromwell schemed to make himself the bride of Henry's daughter Mary, that Cromwell schemed to improve his own lot at the expense of the old blood in the kingdom, that Cromwell often compared himself to the king or speculated on what life would be like when the king was dead, which was a capital crime. That was one prong. And the other prong was religious, that Cromwell had been secretly a sectarian, a reformer, not in line with Henry's own view of the shape that the church should take. Sometimes directly opposed to that view. And that Cromwell had been indiscreet enough to make both of those things a matter of record, so that his enemies have written records to throw in his face. And Cromwell fights it. We get one of those scenes. I wish we had more. We get one long scene and one short scene of him rhetorically fencing with his interrogators. I wish there were more. Those interrogations, we're told, went on all summer long. All through June and all through July. And a couple more of those scenes would have been, I think, really good. Maybe that's just me being greedy because Mantell is really good at them. But eventually comes the day when it's not just imprisonment in the Tower. There was a legal process called a Bill of Attainder. And once that went through Parliament, you were dead. You were legally dead. And all that was left to do was dispose of the body. As Cromwell says in these pages, all that's left to do is determine the manner in which you will become a corpse. But you're already dead. So once a Bill of Attainder has been passed, even if Henry VIII had said, release Exeter, it would have been as a nobody, as a legal nobody. Henry would have had to strong arm the entire legal apparatus of the country in order to change that. And once Cromwell knows that, he knows that the end is not far off. It will be just a whim. He actually says, so I won't see August. The hare that flees the harvester, the cold morning dews after St. Bartholomew's Day, or the leaf fall in the dark blue nights. He knows he won't see the autumn. Now that he's been attainted, he knows that he won't see the autumn. And sure enough, his jailers are being very strict. They have been told to be very strict there. He is not allowed to wander. He is under heavy guard. His doors are to be locked. And also they're under orders not to tell him, not to answer many of his questions. He wants to know who's in the tower with him, for instance, who are in the other rooms, who else has been taken. What news do you have of the outside world? Some of his attendants bring him those news. His son, his nephew, who are still part of Henry's Privy Council, showing that on some level Henry is not burning bridges with the whole family. And I guess maybe stoking the slight hope that Henry will at some point just say, no, let him go. Because his son, his nephew is valuable to me, let him go. A vain hope. Cromwell is right. Henry never does that. But nevertheless, that hope lasts until he is tainted. And then once he is, it's just a question of time. His jailers are being tight-lipped. Cromwell wants to know, do you know when it will be? And one of them says, well, if you were to say your prayers tonight, that wouldn't be amiss. And Mantell has the narrative challenge here that all books do when they do this. This is a very, very close first-person perspective from Cromwell's point of view. It's not told from his perspective in terms of the first-person voice, but it's only the things he knows and sees and nothing else. And what do you do with a setup like that if your character is going to end having his head cut off? That's tricky to do. I mentioned there have been some books that have tried that. Cromwell isn't sure. For the bulk of these pages, he isn't sure that he is going to have his head cut off. You might think, what difference does it make? But it makes a big difference, as Cromwell actually expounds on that in this chapter. On the various ways that Italians have to kill someone by torturing them to death over the course of months. There are a number of ends that are on the cards. Henry Wriothesley tells Cromwell that the Duke of Norfolk, a longtime enemy of his, is pushing hard with Henry to have Cromwell hanged, drawn, and quartered. An utterly horrifying death that is typically not given to members of the gentry. Typically not given to, it wouldn't be given to a Lord Essex. But there are two other options. One is that he be burned to death. Some of the allegations that are being made in front of Parliament and in front of the King's Council are for heresy. And the other option is to be beheaded with a sword or an axe. And believe it or not, there's, I think, a case to be made that the reason that Henry raises Cromwell to the peerage immediately before he has him arrested is because Henry was already determined that he was going to kill Cromwell and wanted at least to be able to kill him gently. That's one reading, and that's certainly another reading, a reading that you can put on that letter from Cromwell, that famous letter to Henry that ends with mercy, mercy, mercy. Is that at that point maybe Cromwell is not asking to be released. Maybe he knows at that point that's not going to happen, and what he's asking for is the mercy of the manner of his death. And he gets it. He goes to the scaffold, and there are two conflicting reports about what his death was like. One says that it was a neat, clean death, and the other says that it was botched, that the executioner was drunk, and that it took a few tries and was grotesque. Butchery was the word. Either one of those could have happened. I hate to be morbid, but I think that the latter is the more likely. Cromwell had lots and lots and lots of enemies. And Henry was not going to want to know the details in any case. And every one of those enemies would have known that. I think here the onus of blame probably falls on the Duke of Norfolk. It wouldn't have taken much to suborn an executioner. Wouldn't have taken much. Norfolk wouldn't have needed to do more than shake loose the change in his purse to give that executioner essentially a year's wages. Why don't you go out tonight and drink? Get good and roaringly drunk. And maybe don't think about tomorrow morning. And the one speculator thought that the executioner was still drunk. We'll never know. Of course, we don't know which of those accounts is true. There are all sorts of other anecdotal stories about who was present and what was said, including Thomas Wyatt. And then the story ends. And the story ends with a pyrotechnic display of prose, of Cromwell's last minutes of awareness. I think that if you parse that prose, you get the impression that Mantell is of the opinion that Cromwell's execution was botched, that it took a few tries to do. I mean, in that pyrotechnic burst of prose that is the last thing in this book, there is Cromwell's awareness is aware of a stabbing, horrible pain before the end, which would seem to indicate one shot at his neck and then another. But it's so lovely that it doesn't matter. And then it's over. Then the story is over. I don't think I'm the only reader of this trilogy who really wished that this went on. Somehow, maybe not with Cromwell, but could you keep writing Tudor fiction like this? There's no other Tudor fiction like this trilogy. It is extremely... The word that always comes to my mind right from the first time that I read Wolf Hall is it's extremely adult. It's not going in for any of the Prince Valiant, marzipan fake castle nonsense that fills so much historical fiction and especially so much Tudor fiction. It's not going in for any of that. Instead, it's just so uncompromisingly mature. It's electric, just electric to read. And that is the end of The Mirror and the Light for our STD infection this time around. I only want to end with a couple of points, an appreciation, but also a little tut-tutting to Hilary Mantel. Now, we've been saying from the beginning. We did a read-along for Wolf Hall. We did a read-along for Bring Up the Bodies. And now we're finishing with this. And I've said all along that in these novels, Hilary Mantel is creating a fictional version of Thomas Cromwell. Not just that she's conveying Cromwell to the pages of a novel, but that she's inventing a Cromwell for that purpose. A forward-thinking Cromwell who cares about ordinary men and is just and decent, and really... He'll be content if he's got a wavering or uncooperative witness in a private room. He'll be content to maybe swing a mallet and hit the wall, causing a little plaster to fall. And that unnerves the witness so much that they start burbling their brains out. Or he'll have another witness in a cellar at Austin Friars, and that witness will succeed in scaring himself out of his wits. It won't be Cromwell who does it. No, not at all. And that Cromwell isn't true. I know that seems a little carping in the face of such a great work of fiction, but it's important to remember that it's important not to take this as gospel. That Cromwell is not true. The real Cromwell deserved to die. There was a reason why he had no friends. There was a reason why everyone knew that. He was a horrible, jumped-up, grubby, greasy-fingered, greedy, Arivist nobody. Nobody liked him. Henry used him for unsavory purposes, and if there had been any real justice, not justice, but symmetry, he would have met an unsavory end. And I have to admire Mantel's audacity throughout the course of this trilogy in creating that Cromwell. Her audacity is just sometimes breathtaking. And it shows, I think, no better than in these final pages when Cromwell is in the Tower. The whole of this section that we're reading today takes place in the Tower of London. He never leaves it. When he's transferred from one quarters in the Tower to the other, he experiences sunlight for the last time. He knows the next time he sees sunlight and feels the wind on his face, he will be walking to his own execution. He never leaves the confines otherwise, and he is mobbed by ghosts. He's threatened by ghosts. The jailer says, "Yeah, we're well haunted here." And he doesn't hear all the ones he expects, but at long last, Cardinal Wolsey does come back to him. And those reappearances are wonderful. The Wolsey character in here is the thing. If I'd had the ability to wave a magic wand and get Hilary Mantel to be alive again and feel like writing again and have 8 more years of writing in her to do, I would have her do a trilogy prequel to this about Wolsey. Because her version of Wolsey has got to be patterned on someone that she knows. It's just too good not to be. The weird combination of dockyard ruffian and weirdly dainty feet, it's wonderful. And Wolsey makes an appearance again as a ghost to Cromwell, and that's terrific. And another presence that is, of course, thick in the air in the Tower is Thomas More, who was committed to the Tower by Cromwell. And at one point in this storyline, Cromwell is remembering Thomas More. And Cromwell's jailer, Martin, is telling him that More was always writing. He was up at all hours, writing. And Cromwell mentions that Cromwell is also writing in these pages. And he remembers that More was writing until his pen and paper were taken away. That's the exact phrasing. Until his pen and paper were taken away. I might add at the same time his books were taken away. And it's all in the passive. You would never guess from that passing mention that it was Cromwell who did that. Cromwell took his pen and paper and books away. They weren't taken away by a summer storm. Cromwell did that. But no, you can't have that in the last moments. This last section, you're supposed to be feeling sorry for him. So you can't have that. You can't have it. That he can't say, "I wish I hadn't done that." No. And there's, I think, pointedly, very little of "I wish I hadn't done" in this section. And there are accesses of prose. I mentioned one already. Mantell allows herself an unbelievable freedom of writing in these pages. There's a last-minute miraculous revelation about a deep connection that Cromwell had with Thomas More. But the writing also is excellent all throughout. It's not just that bravura final few paragraphs. It's all the rest of it. This is an exquisitely written book. It has a lot more indulgence for those kind of rhetorical flourishes than the previous two books do. But some of them are just wonderful. Even so, some of them are just wonderful. There's one passage that I want to read to you. Cromwell in the Tower. This is a place where hope dies. And he is imagining something. And I've read this probably 5 times. I still don't know exactly how this fits into the narrative. But it's so lovely. It's just so wonderful. I want to read it to you here. All your life, you tramp the empty road with the wind at your back. You're hungry, and your spirit is perturbed, and you journey on into the gloom. But when you get to your destination, the doorkeeper knows you, and a torch goes before you as you cross the court. Inside there is a fire and a flask of wine, and there is a candle, and beside the candle your book. You pick it up and find your place is marked. You sit down by the fire, open it, and begin your story. You read on into the night. That is just lovely. That is just exquisite. Maybe Hilary Mantel didn't even know where exactly that fits. Cromwell is certainly not in this position in the Tower. Maybe he hopes that he will reach that position after his execution. I think it's lovely. Just lovely. It's lacking only dogs to be perfection. Of course, that is the ultimate dream, that when you're done wandering, tramping empty roads with the wind at your back, you will reach that haven. And the doorkeeper will know you. And someone will light your way across the courtyard to a flask and a candle and a book. That is wonderful. It really makes you feel for this Thomas Cromwell, who is in the Tower and is not going to be leaving it except to his death. Which means that I feel parenthetically behooved to point out that this Cromwell was guilty. He wasn't just horrible. He was a horrible person, but he was also guilty. On both charges. There are plenty of records. He was guilty on both charges. He did exceed his remit with Henry, often behind Henry's back, without Henry's permission, making overtures, granting things, refusing to grant things that should have gone to the king. In this, Wolsey was exactly the same as Cardinal Wolsey, who did the exact same thing. Cromwell and Wolsey did the same thing. They overreached when they thought they had all the power in the world in their fingertips. They don't. As Norfolk tells Cromwell in an earlier bit of this book, we're all just tools to him. He can end us at any moment, any of us. The Duke of Suffolk tells Cromwell that in the chapters that we're reading today. He says, why would Henry need to steal anything? Why would he need to become a house robber? He could take anything from us at any time. Wolsey did overreach, and so did Cromwell. Maybe not a capital punishment, but at this point in Henry's career, and it only got worse in the next 10 years, capital punishment was pretty much the only kind of punishment that he did. But also in ecclesiastical matters. Cromwell was, in terms that Cromwell himself had set out, and that Parliament had set out in legislation during that period when Cromwell was sick, that we talked about last time, where he was sick with a fever and could not look after his own interests, and had no one to do it for him. In the section that we're reading today, he says, I am in fact dying of that Italian fever, because he lost all important access to the king, and once it was gone, it didn't come back. But according to those articles and all of that stuff, and according to Henry's own beliefs, Cromwell was a heretic, was suborning heresy, both at home and abroad. And that's to say nothing of all the stuff we don't know. How deeply is Cromwell in the employ of the emperor? when he pushes so hard for a leaguer with Anne of Cleves and her father, what aspects of those negotiations were liturgical or ecumenical and are not known to us, were destroyed at one end or another. Even the stuff that we have would easily have been enough to warrant burning Cromwell at the stake, where he would have been a long time dying. And the other stuff, the secular stuff, was certainly treason. At least in the narrow scope that Henry defines it, it certainly was. It was certainly worse than anything the Duke of Norfolk ever did. Just I don't mean to heap shade on the dead, either Cromwell or Hilary Mantel here, but it's worth remembering that this is a work of fiction, and it's worth celebrating because it's a masterly work of fiction. By the time I was done with this book, every time I'm done with this book, I halfway want to believe that this was, in fact, Cromwell, even though I know better. So there you go. We're at the end of The Mirror and the Light. We're at the end of this great trilogy. And I'd love to know, of course, with any Steve Donoghue Book Club choice, I'd love to know where you stand on the subject. Did you actually read these books along with the club, and did you like them? What do you think of them? Was it your first time through them? All that sort of stuff. We're going to wrap up this for now, and we will move on next time to this book. This is The Hemlock Cup by Bettany Hughes. We are moving to 5th century Athens. We are moving to Socrates and Athens. This book is set up in 8 acts, like it was one super long Athenian drama. It's in 8 acts, and each act is about 100 pages long. Or no, 50 pages long. So we're going to read 2 acts per week. So for next weekend, we'll be reading Act 1 and Act 2 of The Hemlock Cup. And we'll see what we make of it. I loved this book the first time. I very intentionally have not read it since. So who knows what it will feel like. I'll be rereading it. I've also not touched it. I haven't dipped into it while I've been dealing with The Mirror and the Light. So we'll be encountering it together. I read it and reviewed it years and years ago when it first came out, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it. So that's it for The Mirror and the Light, and we'll be heading to the ancient world next time. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.